Sorry, Barden enjoyers, we gotta talk about Engineer. We're coming up on a year since the balance pass that overhauled Engie, turning him from a wet paper towel that folds faster than a Smiker in Orc Maelstroms to a powerful ranged career. The glow-up made him too powerful though, and while Fat Shark did give Engie a slap on the wrist back in February, all of which were good changes, they weren't enough. Engineer is still way too powerful and takes control of a lobby way too easily, and there really is no way around saying this, but he needs a nerf. He's just like Old Battle Wizard or Sister of the Thorn, and that's a legitimate problem. The thing I don't see people talk about much though is that conceptually, his rework is a sound idea for Engineer. Engie is an inventor, and he creates tools to help him solve problems he might face in the field. It makes sense that Barden would invent multiple different tools and weapons for him to use to deal with the different problems he would face, especially since lore-wise, Barden locked himself in his room for over a week, and in that time invented multiple tools to take into battle. Engie is the perfect chassis for a multi-tool type career who has an answer to almost every problem he might face, but the problem with him right now isn't that core design, but that he is given every single tool he could possibly need at once, rather than him being forced to pick and choose what he wants, and that a lot of what he has is just overtuned. What would be the best way to nerf Engie without outright gutting him and making him bad again, though? He is too powerful in both PvP and PvE, but I believe that with some fairly simple changes, he can be balanced in both modes. First, and this technically doesn't have anything to do with Engie directly, is that Trollhammer Torpedo needs a nerf. It's simply too powerful in its current state, and while it should be a powerful weapon, I mean, it's a grenade launcher after all, you shouldn't be able to use it as freely as you can now. An ammo reduction of about 50% would still allow it to be a powerful weapon, but that power would come at a cost of a reduced uptime via a low ammo count, requiring the user to more carefully pick and choose when to use it. Second, and hear me out on this one, Bombardier and AP slugs should have their locations on the talent tree switched. The problem with Engie regarding his bombs isn't that he has too many bombs or that he can throw them freely without hurting his teammates, but rather that he can have both at the same time. Engineer should be forced to choose between either having few bombs that he can use freely without risk of friendly fire, or a lot of bombs that he cannot use freely due to the risk of hurting his team. In order to best reflect this new ideal, I would also suggest moving the bomb crafting portion of Ingenious Ordnance over to Bombardier, as allowing bombs, and by proxy the Trollhammer Torpedo, to completely ignore friendly fire is powerful enough to be its own standalone talent. This is a pretty hefty buff to Bombardier though, which is why I would also recommend reducing the amount of bombs Barden starts with down to 2 in PvE and only 1 in Versus mode. Perilous Overclock also needs a slight reduction in its power as it offers too much for not enough cost. A reduction of charge rate from 25% down to 20% and crit chance from 8% down to 4% would be the perfect mix between benefit and danger. Engineer is now good to go for PvE, but PvP Engineer still needs some tweaks. Superior Gaskets acts as a free 20% power increase for Engie across the board, which makes him too good at ranged damage, and should be reduced down to 2% per stack. And lastly is his crank gun should also be tweaked, but the exact way is kind of dependent on how Fat Shark views Engineer in Versus mode. First, they could say, with infinite ammo, Engie's crank gun should deal less damage than a ranged weapon that has an ammo cost tied to it, and just choose to nerf the damage. This would theoretically work because Engie's crank gun has virtually zero aim punch penalties when getting hit, nor does it consume ammo, which increases its overall uptime compared to other weapons, so less overall damage would be the obvious trade-off. The second path they could take is by saying, Engineer should be rewarded for keeping his crank gun out as he is unable to defend himself, but should have to more carefully choose when and where to shoot. The trade-off here would be to decrease the overall uptime of the crank gun, which would be best done, in my opinion, by decreasing the time his stacks of pressure stay up. This could be a simple numbers change, from 12 down to 8, but I would personally suggest making it so that pressure stacks diminish at double the speed only when Engineer is firing his crank gun. This would reward good target prioritization and push NGs to only use their crank gun when they need to, rather than just relying on it for most of the match. Both of these ideas could work, but I'm personally more partial to the idea of increased pressure drain while firing, as it nerfs Engineer without making him feel significantly worse. Having to hold left click for an extra second versus specials because of a damage nerf would feel kind of bad, but allowing the Engineer player to partially circumvent the nerfs by using his crank gun intelligently would encourage people to get good at his micro gameplay so that they can do well with him. With these changes, Engineer would still be a strong choice of career for Versus mode, but not oppressively so. He would still fill the niche of a multi-tool type character that has an answer for everything, but he now has built-in cooldowns to his kit that the Pact Sworn can exploit. And likewise, PvE Engineer is still strong, but must now rely on his team to help him out rather than being able to do everything himself. What do you think, though? What changes do you think Engineer should receive? Let me know down in the comments below.